Welcome to Colin's computing presentation of the year-end tips and tricks for Microsoft Dynamics. I will be going through the system as if you have at least Microsoft Dynamics GP version 10, 2010, or that maybe you're planning to upgrade to 2013 in the next couple months. So we're going to get started. We do have a ton of slides, so I have about 40 seconds per slide that we're going to go through. This is the agenda. We're going to start with a couple of announcements that I want to make sure that you all are aware of, a couple of the year-end changes that have come into effect, and then kind of the module order that you should be going through to close your system. The only item that is not in the correct order would be the U.S. payroll, which is at the end. I've put that so that if people do not have U.S. payroll, that they don't have to stay on past the general ledger, but you would be closing payroll prior to closing your general ledger. So that is the only thing that's not in the order of closing. You probably have heard that Microsoft Dynamics GP 2013 is due out in December. At this point, we're looking at probably December 19th. The second thing is that Ethotech has contacted us and told us that their product called Smart Sort, which I'll show you in a second, is now available for download for free. And so in case you want to use that, I'll give you a little bit of information. I know taxes are going up, sales tax, and so just some things to consider if you're using like a sales order processing module, that you might want to look at the product Avatax that automatically updates your taxes for you so that you're not having to do that. And then just another thing that we thought of is, hey, if you do have some vendors that have invoices and you're being taxed on them as of January, if you pay them before January, you're going to pay, that 0.25% less if you get them paid in December. So just kind of an obvious thing that maybe some people have thought about. We do have a new YouTube channel, and we have been putting out some videos, and these videos are literally like 3 minutes, 4 minutes in length of some of the various enhancements that are coming in 2013. So if you just go out to YouTube and search for Colin's Computing, you'll see our channel out there with a bunch of short videos. So I'll be continuing to put videos out there. Again, just the two things about Smart Sort that I want to tell you about. This is a free download, so if you contact us, we'll help you get it loaded. What it does is it allows you to save the way that you look things up in Dynamics. So in Dynamics, you already have the option that you can say, okay, when I look something up, here's my default sorting method. But if you want to sort further and say, I want to filter maybe by a sales territory, if you have particular sales reps that are logging in, they can save by user ID their own lookups to things like customers and vendors and items. And so they would set up maybe a smart list or just a filter, and when they go to do like a customer lookup, it would look the same as it does now, but it would be filtered and sorted in the way that they want. And so this is just a small list of all the windows that have that capability of having this smart sort. And again, it's a free download. It used to be a $1,000 product, and Ethotech is now offering it to the Microsoft channel customers for free. So now let's go ahead and jump to the year end. At year end, Microsoft does release a service pack, and it's their year end update. There's two things to consider at year end. There's the year end update that does have changes to things like 1099 and obviously some payroll changes. And then there are the payroll tax updates. So at the top of my screen, I'm talking about the year-end update of code that the system needs to do, things like modifying the 1099 format versus just taxes, which is not a code update, but the values within the tax tables change. And that would be down at the bottom here, something that you could really do yourselves. We would walk you through the screens, but you could do that. But the year-end update is not something that we're recommending clients do on their own. And I mentioned that you should be on these versions, version 10, version 2010, or version 2013. By when you log into Dynamics now, there's a little question mark, and then you just say About Dynamics GP, and you'll see that it's version 10.1868 or 0.2106. Those are the versions that you're going to want for year end. At the bottom, The round 7 just got released for payroll taxes, and that was a date of 11/30. So when you go to log in and you're running payroll, the last update had a lot of changes to California, and then some of these other states were previous rounds. So I'll show you in the end how to look for payroll updates. Is it important for us to install this tax update? Number one, it is important, as I said, for November 30th to have that update in, because there are some changes coming for FICA in 2013. It won't affect 2012 if you go ahead and install the 2012 payroll tax update for the end of the year and the actual code update. It's not going to mess up your 2012 payroll. Once you get to 2013, there is going to be a tax update for 2013 that everybody will get. That is not released till mid-December. That will give you your updates for taxes for 2013. Also, we have a Collins blog. So at the very bottom, you could literally, like if you wanted right now, go out to this HTTP Collins Dynamics GP blog spot and just click on join this site, and you'll be notified anytime we put something out on our blog. We do not blog all the time just for the heck of it. We put things out there like, hey, there's a payroll update. Hey, there's some changes to pricing. You know, it's important things that we want our customers to know, and it's out there on the blog. Other things on our blog are just all of our newsletters and all of our works, these free webcast updates. When you update with this year-end update, we obviously want you to back up your Dynamics database, all your company databases. We also want to take copies of your modified reports and forms because it is a code update. Also, just like we suggest that we always run a test upgrade, they are also suggesting that you run test upgrades in a test environment before. And then just a comment, the upgrade does need to happen both on the server and the workstations, that the code that the workstations use has also changed with this year-end update. Okay. Users that are running the update must have local administration rights. I won't go into complete details on the updates. This is the last screen of this, just so you know. There are 2 components to it. We'll be updating the application, and then we'll be upgrading all of your databases, including the Dynamics database. So it is a 2-part upgrade this time for the year-end update. Then we want to make sure that then after we log in, that all the products have been updated and that all of the versions are the right version. So just year-end closing. What are the key tips, vital year-end notes? General Ledger goes last. That's pretty obvious. All of your other modules feed into General Ledger, so you want to do that last. We suggest that you absolutely use some sort of checklist, whether you've put them in your routines checklist that are available in Dynamics, or whether you're going off of something like this slide deck or some of the tech knowledge articles. So we do suggest that you're going through a checklist. You want to validate your backups. So not just backup, but make sure that somebody is validated that if you had to go to a backup, that they're actually backing up the right things. There is a difference between a fiscal year and a calendar year close in accounts receivable, accounts payable, and inventory. We'll talk about those as we go through. All of the modules are now date sensitive, meaning that it's not imperative that you have to close on 12/31 of 2012, but there are a couple of fields that won't be right. And what that is something that says amount since last close. So I'll show you those screens so you know what I'm talking about. If you're running version 10 of Dynamics GP, then your last update that's going to be available is that first payroll tax update for 2013. There is already a second payroll tax update that is scheduled because some states don't have all of their updates out, but Microsoft is not going to do that update for version 10. So you need to get to either 2010 or plan to upgrade to 2013. In the year-end update for this year, there's magnetic media changes, there's some country code changes, there's some changes to fixed assets and how it depreciates luxury items, and there are some changes to the 1099 form. So again, all customers that use any of these modules are going to be affected and need to do a year-end update. 2013, the payroll tax changes, I mentioned that round one for that January 2013 payroll tax update, Microsoft's going to release that sometime in mid-December. So we should hear about that very soon. And then the second round is scheduled for January. Before you put in those 2013 payroll tax changes, that part of the upgrade, run your final 2012 payroll check runs first. So I'm going to start with distribution, and that really is focusing on inventory. But if you are using purchase order processing or sales order processing, then you're going to want to put in and post, so enter and post all of those transactions for 2012 first in those modules, because of course they're going to affect inventory. So you're going to want to kind of make sure that all your POP and SOP transactions are completed, and then you're going to close your inventory module. Now, what does it do when you close inventory? But it basically is moving over both the quantities and the dollars for this current year. So current year, you're going to move those over to the last year columns, and you're going to zero out the quantities for the current year. You're going to make sure that all of the on-hand quantities for some of these reports are zeroed out again for the beginning quantity for the year. So how many items are sold this year? That's going to zero it out when you say, let's update inventory. Okay, same thing with things like quantity sold. There are additional options that you don't have to check, but it asks you, do you want to go ahead and remove items and their receipts for items that are completely sold? If you're running inventory, it's just some transactions. Do you care to see the transactions for items that are completely sold and zeroed out, and for discontinued items, and for things like serial and lot numbers, if you want to go ahead and remove those records now that the new year has started? The last two things are updating the standard cost to the current cost if you're using FIFO or LIFO periodic valuation methods, that it's going to go ahead and update those costs. That field of current cost is going to move into standard cost. And then remove the cost change history, which is just a history of, what happened, why did these costs come in. You choose whether you want to keep these or not at the end of the year. So as I'm looking at an inventory history, you'll see here these current year, the quantities and the dollars, they're going to be moved to last year, and then the current year is going to be zeroed out. There still is, if you look at the bottom of the screen, we still are going to have the ability to run historical reports that show that in April or in 2014, totals for either months or years of quantities sold. So we're not losing that, it's just moving them from these fields and these windows. So how do I close inventory? You're going to, as I mentioned, close all of your transactions or post all of your transactions for 2012 in any of these other modules. So I said purchase order and sales order, but of course things like project accounting and bill of materials and field service and manufacturing, they all also use inventory. Also, if you are using sales order and purchase order processing, we suggest that you go ahead and reconcile those modules, because reconciling those modules will affect inventory. So you go under GP, Tools, Utilities, and you follow these paths to go ahead and reconcile. These are the screens that come up. You could go ahead and say print the report only so you see what's going to happen, or go ahead and reconcile and print the report in both of these, and then go ahead and process. Now, people should not be in the system when you do these things, and they do take a little bit of time. So I would suggest you're going to do those in the evening or on the weekends, or at least know that people aren't critical trying to run processes during this time that you're running them. So getting back to inventory itself, once you close those other modules, or you're done at inputting those other modules because they don't have strict closing routines, you're going to go ahead and reconcile your inventory. So this is the path to how to get to this screen, and whether you want to include the item history or not in your reconcile, it's up to you. And you run them for all. Again, that process takes a while. Optionally, you can go ahead and do these other steps, which are completing a physical inventory if you want to do that at the same time, and then printing any other reports that you need to for inventory. You make a backup, I would suggest, because you've done a lot of work in all these reconciles, and then go ahead and close the inventory for the year. So you would go to Tools, Routines, Inventory, you would get this box, and then as I said, you have the choice of whether you want to remove discontinued items, your attributes for lots, and then your sold receipts, and then moving that history of the cost changes. So then the last thing is go ahead and saying, I want to update my item standard cost with the current cost if you're using LIFO or FIFO. So I mentioned that you can do some physical stock counts. If you want to automatically have this happen in the system, you can have stock calendars set up. I'm not going to go into this in detail because it would take more than an hour in itself. But if you go to these screens, you can create your stock calendars. So when I'm going to run stock counts, and you set up these calendars for all of your inventory items, you put them into cycles so that maybe you have certain items getting counted at certain times of the year. Then you set up that schedule, and then you can go ahead and run it. And if you go into transactions, inventory, and stock count entry, you would see what is going to post. So here is a copy of these screens that show, here's my stock count entry. When you get into the stock count, if you click on unposted transactions, oh, I've got items that look like they're different than what my stock says I should have. Maybe they're tied up in these transactions for that item. So just double check that before you go ahead and start posting adjustment quantities. If you're just completely doing a manual stock count, you're going to go ahead and print this report under Reports, Inventory Activity, this physical inventory checklist. You're going to say, this is the count that I show. You're going to then match it up against some stock count reports, and you're going to go into Transactions, Inventory, Transaction Entry, and enter an adjustment transaction. So what are the key points for inventory? Just make backups. Use all your other modules to their fullest extent, sales order, purchase order, even those ones of project and bill of materials and manufacturing and field service. Reconcile and get all those transactions done first, and then go ahead and run your inventory closing. Now, if you happen to be running these versions of 10.0 Service Pack 2 or later, or any of the 2010, then there is an optional historical inventory trial balance report that has come into play that I'll show one screen on. Now, talking about inventory count, if anybody wants to have more of an automated system that automatically posts everything for you, and you can use scanners and things like that, then we have a product that SalesPad puts out called Data Collection, and we'll be happy to talk to you about that. But again, this is not a sales presentation. We just want to show you what's out there. Microsoft has mentioned that all these other reports here, the stock status, purchase receipts, these are some reports you might want to have copies of. You can send them to a PDF file so that you don't have to physically print out, hundreds of pages. But if you want to go ahead and remove some of those options of like the sold receipts, then maybe you want to have a report of some of these things before you remove that history. These are the windows that go through in closing the inventory year end. One thing I did want to mention is that in this current version that you are all using, that at the end of the year, if you do update your standard cost with the current cost, it gives you a report that then you might need to do something in General Ledger to offset what it's now set as your standard cost. But in 2013, it actually creates that entry for you. So that's kind of a nice thing coming in 2013. I mentioned that there's a new historical trial balance report. In the past, you were never able to say, give me my inventory balance as of a particular date. You now can do that in version 10 with Service Pack 2, and then also 2010. If you haven't last year put it in your system, talk to us this year, because it was available last year. So I did mention this in our year-end closing last year. And then I just put some knowledge base articles that, if you run into issues at the end, sometimes press the button twice and close inventory twice. What do you do about that? So there's some knowledge base articles, or you can give us a call. Okay, I'm going to move on to receivables. At calendar year end, really all that happens in receivables is the finance charge numbers move over. Okay, so at fiscal year end, on the other hand, all the other amounts, and I'll show you these amounts on the next screen, but if you go to card sales summary, you're going to get this screen. And if you look here at some of these amounts that are shown at the bottom, you have year to date, the number of sales documents, number of paid invoices, all of these dollar figures. Those are all going to move over at a fiscal year end close. If you click on this button at the bottom that says finance charges, those are the numbers that are going to move over at a calendar year end close. So when you go to close receivables, it's going to ask, are you closing fiscal year, calendar year, or you can choose both. But all of these numbers on this screen are going to change when you close the fiscal year end, and calendar is the finance charges. In this view, it says, I want to look by fiscal year. So you choose in this screen whether you want to be fiscal year looking at this, calendar year looking at this, or there's a third choice of amount since last close. If you want to look at the numbers since your last close, there's that option. That one is not date sensitive. It's just since you physically press that button, what has happened. So that's the only field that is not date sensitive. So what do I do for receivables year end? You can go ahead and put things into batches for the next year. Just don't post them. But basically, you're just going to go to Tools, Routines, Sales. You're going to get this screen here. And as I mentioned, you can tell it I want to close fiscal year, calendar year, or both, or all. And then do I want to report? I highly suggest you print the report, even if you're printing it to screen. The other thing is once you click on process, you cannot change where you print this, right? So you're gonna, if you want to send it to like a PDF, then you want to make sure that you have the PDF writer available and that you can go ahead and select the right printer before you go into this screen. Now, what's fantastic is one of the big changes to 2013, that version of Dynamics GP, is that you don't have to worry about that anymore, that after you hit buttons, you can go ahead and change your printer. But right now, all the versions that our customers have, that's not true. The other thing is when you come into this screen, before you hit process, just take a quick look at the last closing date, because if it says this year already, 2012, don't hit the button again, because you're going to move all those fields over again. The other thing is that if you want to go ahead and close your company tax details, we suggest you do this after closing both accounts payable and accounts receivable, but most people think about closing sales tax, not closing purchasing tax. So after you close your accounts receivable and your accounts payable, come back into Tools, Routines, Company, and it'll actually close your tax totals for all of your tax details and tax schedules. You can print a report first if you just want to see what's going to be moved over, or you can go close year and move these over, and it's going to show you what it originally had and then what it's moving everything to. So year to date, last year to date, it's going to move those fields over. You should probably know where that is already, but if you go to Tools, Setup, Company, and Tax Details, that is where you go to change your tax details and the percentages that it calculates for you. Okay, so that's really it with receivables. We're going to move on to payables. Again, what do I do for payables? So at calendar year end, the only fields that move are my 1099 amounts. Those are the only ones that move at calendar year end. When you say I'm closing fiscal year end, those are the rest of them. So I'll show you. When I go into a vendor summary screen, I have all my year to date and my last year and life to date. So when I close calendar year end, my 1099, that one line is the only line that gets updated. When I close my fiscal year end, all the rest of the amounts move over. And so the only thing that's happening in GP is the amounts move from a year to date column to last year to date. That's it. So your year to dates are going to be all zeroed out. When I go into a summary screen, again, I have a choice. Do I want to see the amounts since my last close, Do I want to see my fiscal year view, or do I want to see my calendar year view? What steps should I take? So again, I want to post all my transactions that affect payables. And payables then sometimes affects fixed assets. So just kind of keeping that in mind, that you don't want to close fixed assets until your payables are in. Here I'm going to post all my transactions. I'm going to make sure that any transactions that I have for 2012 are in a separate batch. I can put those in my system. I can enter in the invoices, just don't post them yet. Then I'll print an age trial balance that maybe I want to keep just so that I know what I had at the end of the year. And Microsoft this year added the suggestion of also having some vendor period analysis report. I don't know if for some reason a lot of the auditors are looking at that, but they just suggest that maybe you add that to the list of reports. Go ahead and make a backup, and then I want to go ahead and print my 1099s. Now you can print your 1099s at any time. You don't have to do it now. It's just, this is kind of, if you're doing everything in kind of the order that you should do things, this is what we're suggesting. You print your 1099s, you modify any amounts, and I'll talk about that, and then you close your year for payables. And then you can go back into general ledger and close your fiscal periods, and then you can go to that part where I said you can move your taxes over if you use payables taxes at all. And then we suggest you make a backup. So I'm going to go over some of these things. The first is, what are the changes for this year? This year, when you go to print your 1099s, there are some fields and check boxes that have moved around on the forms. So Microsoft has had to move the fields to those places. Also, there's some, it's not mandatory, but the IRS wanted you to mask some of the ID numbers that are shown on some of these forms. And we have a separate document that we can send you just on the changes for 1099 and 1096 forms. So if I'm looking at a 1099, again, I'm not going to go into super detail about processing 1099s, but you all know that when you set up a vendor, you tell the system whether it's 1099 applicable. And so when you pay an invoice, that's the time that your 1099 amount is updated in the system, because it's the amount paid to the vendors. So if I were an accounts payable person processing 1099s, I would go out, create a smart list, and say, show me all my vendors who are 1099 vendors, and then make sure that I even put another field to give me, whether they were set up as W-9s and whether I have them. Do I have their W-9 information? So I always set up in my vendors that, yes, I have my W-9 information, and put that in one of my user-defined fields, just so that I know. I would go ahead and print an edit list of my 1099s, which you do just from your 1099 print screen, and here's the path for it. And then I could look at all my vendors, like, do they look right? Does it look that like the information is right? So in 1099s, just again, if you go to cards purchasing 1099s, you can pull up a vendor, and by month, you can literally modify every amount of what that 1099 amount is supposed to be. Now, this is in version 10 and 2010. Okay? To set up a 1099 vendor, it's under the options. So, and after you go into vendor maintenance and options, you just set the 1099 box to where you want to be collecting it. And that should be happening through the year. Now, in GP 2013, there is a great new feature, and that's that you can actually modify transactions that have been posted to say, you know what, it said that this 1099 amount was a certain amount, here's the real amount. So you can actually modify documents to add a 1099 amount in or modify 1099 amounts. I won't go into this a lot because you don't have it yet. It's in 2013, but I just wanted to let you know it's coming. So instead of having to modify these boxes that were in this previous screen, you could actually go and modify the transactions now. Okay. The other thing you could do is make a vendor completely 1099 after transactions have been entered. And this is a process that's available, again, only in 2013. But when you go in there, you can say, you know what, this vendor said it was not a 1099 vendor. I now want it to be a 1099 vendor, and I want it to go ahead and process for these vendors. And you could do a whole vendor class or just one vendor, and it'll give you a report of what the old 1099 amount was, what the new amount is now, and run through that process for you. Printing your company 1099s, again, I'm not going to go into this in great detail, just that if you go to this screen, you could go ahead and print your 1099s. You put in the year so you don't have to worry. You can print any year at any time. The transactions are now date sensitive. Just remember that it's only going to show those vendors that have over $600 in 1099 payments. So don't panic if you don't see a vendor that you think is a 1099 vendor, but maybe you only paid them $500. So it wouldn't show on the list. So you can go see them in a smart list, but it's not going to print a 1099 for them unless it's $600 and more. From this window in GP 2013, you'll also be able to now print the 1096 forms. Same type of screen that you got in Receivables is in Payables. So you go to Tools, Routines, Purchasing, Year-End, Close, knowing that once you hit go ahead and close the year, you can't change your printer. So make sure that you have a printer that's valid. If you want to send it to a PDF, that you've already got that as your default. And then in mentioning again, in 2013, you won't have to worry about that anymore. You go ahead and say whether you're closing just the calendar, so just the 1099 amounts, or fiscal and calendar at the same time. And I usually suggest you at least want to print the report to screen, and then you can decide whether to print it. And then don't forget, if you have some payables taxes that you're paying, then you go ahead and do that after. Okay, project accounting year end. What happens in project accounting? So there's really nothing to do for project accounting itself. It's just that we want to suggest that projects that span multiple years, that maybe you have some process you want to go through with them, but you want to make sure you're posting all your cost transactions, that you're running any final billings before you go and close those AR and inventory and everything else that has to do with it. And then just that you might have rate changes in project accounting as of the new year. So that might be the time that you go ahead and update those. So it's not anything that you have to do in project accounting, just realizing that you have this module that feeds into other modules. So post all of those transactions before closing payables and receivables and inventory and general ledger. Fixed assets. There are changes to fixed assets this year. I mentioned that the year-end update is going to actually make changes for luxury items. So there were some changes made by the IRS, and so here's just a link out to what those were. The other thing was that if you had assets that were less than a penny in a period, the system just didn't know what to do with it. We didn't have any clients that I know of that did that, but just in case you run into it, that now when you depreciate, it's going to work and it's not going to hang. And then there's just one article about fixed asset year-end closes that I would suggest. So fixed assets, what changes, what moves? Well, the year-to-date maintenance amount and all of the beginning quantities for years are obviously going to move. So anything that says this year is going to move over. And then for year-to-date depreciations and last year-to-date, life-to-date, those are just getting updated from when you close. The thing that we don't want you to do is when you close the fiscal year in fixed assets, it automatically increments the year. So you don't need to update that. It will do it for you. Prior to fixed assets, I mentioned that you want to make sure you close general ledger, but I also did say that accounts payable feeds into fixed assets. So remember that you're posting all of your payables that could have fixed assets implications before you go and close fixed assets. And then just make sure that before you're processing transactions in the new year for fixed assets that you've closed all your books. You might have several books. So you don't want to have transactions that are in one book and then you're trying to depreciate. The other thing is make sure you go all the way through the last day of the year. Some people think that if I go through the 30th instead of the 31st, I can save something. It just doesn't work that way. So you're going to go through tools, routines, fixed assets, depreciate, and run that process, and then go ahead and run the general ledger interface. In fixed assets, There are some dates that, the calendars are set up, so you want to make sure that you've created your fiscal year for 2013 in General Ledger. A couple things, you might want to run some of these reports so you have them. And I just mentioned you want to make sure that when you're building your calendars and your quarters that you're setting them up for the next year and that you actually have those set up in the fiscal period setup window. When you get to your year-end process, you're going to go ahead and just click on here, which is Tools, Routines, Fixed Assets, Year-End. You're going to select which book. So you can select each one or all of them and then click Continue. Now don't panic, there's no report. You can go ahead and run reports afterwards, but it just finishes. It doesn't print a report at the end. So I wanted to just show you very quickly, in 2013, Microsoft has done a ton of changes to fixed assets. So that is something that they haven't done in years. There's all kinds of historical depreciation reports. There's an actual progress bar to tell you how depreciation is going. You can do mass reversals instead of one at a time. There's all kinds of new abilities of generating asset IDs. And then there's a huge change in that there's some automated integration to General Ledger that wasn't available before. So it almost seemed like fixed assets was just this separate module that created these batches, and then you had to manually but post them into General Ledger. And now it actually creates transactions in the General Ledger. You don't have to say move them over, and it'll post in detail if you want. So those are my favorites out of that list. Again, it's in 2013. We'll talk about it later. Analytical accounting. The only thing that has really been affected in analytical accounting with the year-end close is that there are some abilities to bring forward your totals for some of your dimensions. And it is going to close whether it's marked or not. So then I just want to say that if you did get some sort of error message, to contact us. So now, in analytical accounting, there was something added last year that says I want to include particular dimensions in my year-end close. So if you set up your system to do that by going to this tool setup options and clicking here, then those dimensions that you have said consolidate those, they will be consolidated for the next year. So that's what this checkbox is. So for each of your dimensions. So if you're running analytical accounting, I suggest you just come in here and take a look at this and decide whether you want to go ahead and push the balance to next year. Now we're at General Ledger. So we have this to go and then Payroll. So General Ledger year-end close, what does it do? The big thing is that it closes your profit and loss accounts through to your retained earnings, and then it just rolls forward all of your balance sheet account balances, right? So after year-end close, your P&L accounts will be at 0, your retained earnings will have that balance, and then all the rest of your balance sheet accounts will have the same balances forward. The retained earnings account is the only account that will actually have a different balance than it did at the end of last year. All the rest of the balance sheet accounts should have the same amount. And just to give you a heads up, in GP 2013, unit accounts will now be able to have the option of whether you want to roll them forward or close them to 0. What does year-end close do? It just physically takes all the balances in your GL 20,000 and it moves them to the historical year. So all those records that have any dates in 2012 are going to be moved to a different table in Dynamics. The other thing is that your fiscal period tables are marked as a historical year. That's key because you can only post to one historical year in Dynamics. So once I close 2012, I will not be able to post to 2011 anymore. Analytical accounting, again, I mentioned that now you are able to have those beginning balance entries pushed forward in analytical accounting too. So that happens during the General Ledger close. In 2013, I'll be showing you there's some new fields and new options. So General Ledger, you don't have to panic. You don't have to do this on 12/31. Again, you want to try to do it before too far in 2013 so that you can start running reports and having your balances for your previous months complete. We don't want any other users in the system when you're closing the general ledger. And you want to make sure that you ask your IT people, do I have enough room for that big GL 20,000 table to be doubled? Because we're creating that GL 30,000 table with all these new entries. And then once it creates them, then it gets rid of the old ones. So we're going to double that space of GL 20,000. We recommend that either you run the general ledger close at your server or just a workstation that's got, a lot of manpower or a lot of horsepower. You just don't want it to be running slow. When you close, it looks like it goes through, it has this process bar, it gets to 50% and it sits there. And so we don't want you to think that it's stuck. It sits there. They have actually changed that finally in GP 2013. So again, something to look forward to. And then as I've mentioned throughout this presentation, these are the order that you should close things in. So what do? I go ahead and complete all of my closing and my other modules. I do any journal entries that I want. And then I start looking, okay, if I close this year, are all of my accounts right? I mentioned that your balance sheet accounts are going to roll forward and your P&L accounts are going to get zeroed out. So I go in and run a smart list and I sort by posting type to make sure that I don't have any account numbers in the 8,000s that are up here in the balance sheet area. So I make sure that I look and I say, yep, glance down this list, all of my balance sheet accounts are balance sheet, all of my profit and loss are P&L. Otherwise I go and I modify it. I go into my card and I mark it as the other type before I run closing. Then I go ahead into my setup company fiscal periods and I close all of my modules so people can't post. So I physically mark the checkboxes. Then I go into my general ledger setup and I make sure that these little checkboxes for accounts and transactions are actually checked so that I don't lose history. And then I can decide whether I want to allow posting to history. Some people like to come in this screen and put like 12 dash for journal entries that are in the year 12 or 13 dash and then let it increment. So you can do that if you want. So I'm suggesting that if that's the thing that you guys do, this is the time to put the 13 in front of that journal entry number. What else do you do? Well, you run check links because you want to make sure that all of your records are up to date, and it takes a while. Again, this is something that you need to plan for and maybe do in the evening or on a weekend. You're going to make a backup, and I'm going to run my trial balance. Again, you can run it to a PDF and email it to yourself. And any financial statements that I have now, before I move all my balances, and zero out things, I'm going to want to run those, whether they're in the FRX or Management Reporter or even in the old advanced financials. Before I run my new year, open it up and close this year, I need to make sure that 2013 is set up. You could do that at any time. So if you wanted to do that immediately after this web conference, you can do that. So go ahead and open up the new year, and then you're going to go to the year-end closing screen, which is going to look like this. When you go into year-end closing, again, before you hit close year, make sure that you have a valid printer or that you have a PDF. Otherwise, just close the screen and go make sure you've got your printer. Because this report that prints, you can't get the same report later. If it looks like it's hanging, just don't close it. It sits there at 50% for a while. Or reboot your computer. It's still working if it's sitting there. So how do I save myself from having to call Collins? Just the biggest things, go do a smart list. Make sure your profit and loss accounts are set up correctly and your balance sheet accounts are set up correctly. Don't reboot your system. And realize that after you close the year, you cannot post to the previous year. So you can post to 2012, you will not be able to post to 2011 anymore. I wanted to mention, some things I didn't talk about too much, but there are 3 huge changes for year-end closing when you run the new version. And that's that you can tell the system that I want to maintain only those inactive accounts with budgets amounts or maintain all of my accounts. Otherwise, it will delete inactive GL accounts. I can also remove like the segments. So if you're not using, account number 3090 anymore, that segment will go ahead and be deleted out of your system, and so that you don't have them listed for options for people to put in. So you can do those two things during year-end closing in 2013. These are 2013 screens I'm showing you. The other thing is unit accounts. I mentioned that you can tell it to clear the balances during year-end. So a couple things to look forward to in 2013. We get a lot of calls that people are being asked by their auditors after they close, hey, we want to see a list of all the GL entries for like a particular year that somebody posted. So here's just some steps that if you create a smart list and filter by financial transactions, it's kind of taking you through the columns that you need to add. So the user who posted, the originating posted date, and the reference. Those three fields are what the auditors are looking for. The other thing is in GP 2013, they added 2 new fields that are now tracked. And that's that if you have people that approve your batches before you post them, it now holds that approval date and that approval ID so that you could put them on these reports. But this is a smart list that a lot of people ask for because their auditors are asking for it. If you are using sales order processing, here are some fields that you might want to put on your reports. Payroll. We're now at round 7 for payroll. That's November 30th that I mentioned. Round 7 was California. So if you have payroll, the FICA and Medicare wages were updated in November. So you're going to at least want to make sure that you've got this November 1st update out. So I'll mention how to do that and how to look it up. So what are the big changes? I mentioned that payroll year-end update is just the year-end update. You have to update in order to get these changes. And that's something that our IT department is going to have to help you do. It's not a simple thing. So we're going to make sure that you update so you get the W-2 and W-3 form changes, that you get all these other changes, and that in 2013, there were some fields added so that it can calculate these Medicare taxes on high earners. Okay, so anybody running payroll, we truly recommend that you get this year-end update along with the payroll tax update. So both update. We are going to be getting, for those versions, people running version 10, they'll get the payroll year-end update. They will get the first round of 2013 payroll taxes. They'll get that release, but then they won't have any other version 10 updates available to them. They'll have to upgrade to 2010. So in 2013, we know that there's a change for the 941s coming, but because the IRS has not released it, you are going to have to upgrade to 2010 to get that change. In 2013, we already know that the FICA Social Security limit was raised, that the Social Security for the employee, that rate is gone back to 6.2 again. It went down last year. It's going back up this year. And that there are some extra 0.9 to take them to 2.35 if somebody earns $200,000. There's also just tax changes, payroll tax changes for all of these states, and that there is some Circular E modifications, but it's not finalized. So that may have to wait for round 2. Now, if you go to your current system, this is how you're going to go in and update payroll taxes, by this path. Verify your version of GP, and that's by just signing in and going to the Help About. You're going to download your payroll taxes. As we said, complete all the runs. So this is what you do at your year end. You're going to complete all your Form 941s, and then you have to make a pre-year end wage file backup. So you've got that backup. Then you're going to go in and you're going to go to Tools, Routines, Payroll, Year-End Closing, and click Process. And that's going to create all your year-end wage files that you need. So you're going to make sure you run all your payroll before you do this. Then after you do this, you might want to go ahead and do one more backup, because then you're going to go ahead and verify all your W-2 and 1099 amounts. You're going to then print them. So this is how you print those. You go to Tools, Routines, Payroll, and you can either edit at your W-2s, or if you're okay with what they look like, you're going to print them. So you're just going to select the radio button in this screen to the right of whether you're running a validation report or an alignment or a W-2 form or your W-3. It's all in the same screen. So on the left is how you edit those amounts if anything's wrong, and on the right is how you print them. Then you're going to print your 1099-R forms. So this is how you get there, and you just click print. Now again, you're just choosing which form on the right-hand side. The other thing that you need to do at the year end is run your magnetic media file, and if you have more than 250 employees, you're going to have to do this. And you go into Tools, Routines, Payroll, Electronic File, and you're going to select, you could have multiple companies, so you could select which companies. You're going to make sure that they've got the ID number down here at the bottom, and then you're going to go ahead and click on this. If you go out here to this AccuAge, you can test the file that gets created. Now, the last thing is that you have a couple optional items that you could do. For human resources, you could go ahead and archive old employees if you'd like. So you're going to go into these screens up here at the top, and you can choose whether you want to archive particular items, all or some. The other thing is that we suggest you go back into your fiscal periods and click on like Close Payroll Series. So you go into the period setup screen and you click on Payroll when you're done with all of this. Along with inactive human resources, you have just employee information, and it just saves disk space, but you don't have to. Inactive employees are not counted in your active employee license count. Now that goes away. With 2013, you're going to hear that everybody gets unlimited employees, so you don't have to worry about that. So when you go ahead and do this remove inactive records, you're going to tell it whether you want to remove the employee records and the history and hit process. This is the screen that I had mentioned going into for the fiscal periods, that you can go ahead and click on all of the modules when you're closing them. A lot of our customers do that as they go through the month, and they just put a little checkbox in each of these boxes. Okay, so after they close it, people don't go ahead and post in those periods. Now, again, after you close your payroll, this is the time that you're going to set up 2013, and then you're going to bring in your payroll tax update, and you go through Microsoft Dynamics GP, maintenance. You just click through all of these. It's going to go ahead and update your payroll taxes. So don't do this until you're done with 2012. You can go ahead and set up your attendance if you're using human resources. And then if you need to update any local taxes or unemployment, obviously you need to do that, and then run your first payroll for 2013. Now, some people say, well, what if I'm not ready to close 2012 before I need to go ahead and run a 2013 payroll? So here are the steps that if you need to do that, you still are going to go run through these processes and make backups and create your year-end wage file, but maybe you don't do some of the cleanup. So here are the steps that I've said you can do, and then go ahead and set up your fiscal periods, process them, and then go back later to run your W-2 and W-3s or your 1099s. So those steps here that I've said then, these are the ones that you don't have to do first. You just go through those first steps and wait to produce all your statements and your forms if you have to. That's okay. You can still do that later. Okay, so the downloads. I mentioned that there are two steps. There's a year-end update that you want Colin's help with, and then there are the ones that if you're in your system and you go to Tools, Setup System, Payroll Taxes, you can go ahead and bring in those updates yourself. I would just maybe give our support department a heads up that you're going to do it so that they know if you run into any issues that they're available. But that bottom part you can do yourself. The top part we're suggesting you don't do yourself. But if you need help just filing 1099s, we have two vendors, both Avatax and Green Shades, that are available to help with 1099 processing. Makes it much easier. You're not having to do the forms yourself. You're just uploading the file and it gets created. So both Avatax and Green Shades. Green Shades has all kinds of other products having to do with filing your W-2s, your 941s, all of that. So if you ever want more automation in doing that, I would suggest that you talk to us about GreenShape. And then again, especially for payroll, I would just give a heads up to our support department with year-end closing. And of course, if you need this year-end update. So, and then just last thing I want to leave you with Microsoft Dynamics GP 2013 coming out, there are over 150 new features. And so we suggest that if you are looking to upgrade to 2013, this is a great conference to send somebody to. You can send one person and they can come back with all the notes and they can have access to all the slide decks at a later date. One change is that Microsoft will not automatically tell us if our customers register for Convergence. So we'd love to have you tell us if you register, because we do have customer dinners and we meet for lunches and networking sessions during Convergence. And we'll be there. We would like to know that you're going to be there. Just a couple of items that are happening at Convergence. This year, the closing keynote is a Nobel Peace Prize winner and the UN Secretary General. Also, the closing reception happens to be Matchbox 20, which is just some entertainment for you. But there are 24 time slots for you to go to sessions. Last year, there were only 17 time slots. This time, there are 24 time slots that you could go to different sessions. They have new networking by region and industry, so you can meet more like clients like yourselves. That all of the mobile capabilities of getting online and looking at your sessions are going to be enhanced this year, so you can get to them on your phone. And they even have a Skype bar, so if you need to talk to somebody, hopefully at home and not your office, but if you need that, there's a Skype bar available. After Convergence, if you go, you have access to all of the session information for even the sessions you did not attend. So if you send one person from your organization, you can download all of the information later. So we highly suggest that you do that. And I thank you very much for your attendance. Have a great day. See you later. Bye-bye.